Welcome to the show, everyone. This is a Stakeholder Centered Coaching production where we believe everyone deserves a stakeholder centered leader. Today's episode is another installment of Conversations with Coaches, where our top coaches share the behind the scenes unfolding of their career. Now, the goal of this series is to give you an intimate peek behind the curtain so that you can see the messy ingredients that go into building a successful coaching career, as well as some of the rewards that come at the end of the tunnel for those who are willing to put in the effort. I'm your host, Brandon Murgard, and if you'd like to ask a question or recommend a guest, then I invite you. Send me an email, podcast@mgscc.net. That's podcast@mgscc.net. Good. My guest today is none other than the Mr. Jathan Janove. Now, Jathan is a master coach and practice leader with Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Centered Coaching. He applies the Stakeholder Centered Coaching methodology with senior executives throughout the United States and helps them overcome their organizational challenges that they're facing. Now, some of you may not know this, but Jathan is the former State Bar Employment Attorney of the Year. And he's also the author of his book, Hard-Won Wisdom, True Stories from the Management Trenches. Jathan is an adjunct professor at the University of California, San Diego Master Series. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jathan Janove. Great to have you on the show, Jathan.
Great to be here.
Now, aside from being connected through Marshall and, basically being my neighbor here in the Pacific Northwest, I have been an avid consumer of your publications for quite some time, and I've thoroughly enjoyed your posts on topics such as verbal Aikido, which I've incorporated not only into my work life, but also into my parenting style. So suffice it to say, Jathan, you've had a profound impact on me already. And so what I'd like to do today is extend the benefit that I've got from knowing you with our listeners.
Thank you. Sounds great.
Good. Well, where I'd like to pick up today is with your coaching career. So we all know Jathan Janove, the employment law attorney. We know Jathan Janove, the author. But today I want to invite you to tell the story of Jathan Janove, master coach and practice leader. So if you'd allow me, I'd like to go all the way back to the beginning to start our story. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Well, so the story actually goes back to high school. My father was a university professor in education development and one of the early practitioners of what's now known as organization development. Before it was really known as a true field of study. It was in its sort of early stages. And my dad was one of those progenitors. And so when I was in high school, he used to bring me along to events, workshops on, how to build trust, collaboration, these sorts of things. And so then I went to law school, and of course, all that went out the window, right? The legal profession isn't based on trust and collaboration, when there's no business in it. So, but I ended up in my practice doing employment law, workplace relationships. So for 25 years, I made a living on toxic workplace relationships. Relationships that, began win-win and ended up lose-lose, and often the worst way for them. And so over time, though, there was like a gravitational pull from what I learned from my father in high school and what he was doing with what I was observing in the workplace. And it started to draw me away from just litigating the ashes of a destroyed relationship to looking at what would change this, what would have prevented it, not just in the sense that there wouldn't have been a lawsuit, but that where the relationship might have been a long-term win-win as opposed to what happened. And so really that's sort of the earlier thing. I wasn't really aware of it. It wasn't a conscious career choice, but it was just something that just started to pull me in the direction of coaching, again, though, with a focus on the workplace. Okay, that the workplace has been my entire 40-year career.
Mm.
Okay. And that's not going to change. But what changed was where I saw myself with regard to the workplace.
So you started off back in high school with this kind of exposure to OD, to L&D, to people processes, and then you went into law. What was the impetus to make such a pivot into law?
Well, one is I've always been, enjoyed and people think good at debate. And maybe also I have kind of an internal jerk inside me that lends itself to being a lawyer. I don't know. But, everybody was always, oh God, he's going to be a lawyer. He's going to be a lawyer. He's going to be a lawyer. And that's how I became a lawyer.
Okay. And so
So,
it sounds like your kind of early feet into this industry actually started with addressing, as you said, the problems that came as a result of employer-employee relationship. At what point, or maybe I should ask, was there a specific point where you said, hey, we can actually prevent this rather than reacting to it?
yes. And that actually occurred before I became trained as a coach.
Hmm.
I started out in the business as a plaintiff's attorney. I represented employees and unions. Okay. So, I sued organization like Marshall Goldsmith's clients. Okay. Hopefully Marshall's not listening in. But then depending on your point of view, either I saw the light or was, drawn to the dark side. The rest of my career was on the management side. And it was in the management side where I started to kind of morph from pure legal advice to organization consulting advice and morphing from legal analysis to legal analysis with coaching elements to it,
Hmm.
human relation elements to it. So that's really, well, way before I decided to just say, I'm making this change. I think that's where the seeds were being planted.
Mm. Okay. Um, So I've heard you talk about pushing. I've heard you talk about polling. One of the curiosities I have from your career is becoming a coach. Was it more of a push away from law, or was it more of a pull into, performance augmentation, for example?
I would say it started as a pull because, you know, I frankly loved being an employment lawyer for the longest time until, well, the pull was where I could really maybe make a difference at the relationship level. That's the pull. Later, a push was added. And without boring your audience, there's a doctrine called spoliation. If there's any lawyers on this, you'll know what the heck I'm talking about. Changed the whole landscape of litigation. Had to do with the internet and technology and email. And so, what had happened in the world of employment litigation was it was all about e discovery. And the plaintiff strategy was to say, you didn't preserve, you didn't save, and therefore you're going to be sanctioned, and et cetera, which meant that the amount of work that it took to get a case to trial just exploded. And the number of boring issues. Well, we want you to transfer everything in your client's, cloud into our cloud. And, it's all this stuff. So that became a push, to be quite honest with you. That whole e-discovery thing was like, you know what? I'm done. So it started with a pull and it ended with a push.
Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. So spoliation, you said, is about the
Oh,
preservation of.
sorry. I guess, yeah. I didn't. It's an instruction. It's a legal doctrine
Mhm.
that says if you destroy evidence or you fail to preserve evidence, you're in big trouble.
Mm.
And then it's a question of what your penalty is, which can range from the client and the lawyer being personally fined to the whole case being decided against you without even going to trial. So it's high stakes. It's called spoliation, as in spoil. Okay. And then spoliation always existed as an issue, but back in the days where it was all paper, it was fairly concrete. But now you get into e stuff, and it's everywhere and anywhere. And it just changed the whole landscape of litigation, and I just really didn't want part of it anymore.
Wow. So when you made the conscious decision, okay, this is the line moving forward, I'm going to be pursuing a coaching career. Did that decision take place before this spoliation was introduced to the legal practice, or did that happen at a different time?
I think they sort of run, initially I was becoming more and more interested in the prevention side.
Hmm.
And then as the litigation landscape changed, it just created a greater sense of urgency, a sense that I don't want to spend the rest of my career mired in endless e-discovery disputes.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to find a different path. So let me try this other path out.
So from the time you had that, let's call that inspiration to go towards coaching, how long did it take you to go from that inspiration to actually action? We hear some coaches say, it took me years to make the final decision, and others, say that I made this instantaneously almost. What was it for you?
Well, it certainly wasn't instantaneous. It was a matter of years,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I don't know how many, but yeah, it wasn't instantaneous. I can assure you that.
Well, you're very involved and have achieved an extremely high level of success here, especially within our network. What was your first exposure to Marshall Goldsmith, and how did that shape your perspective of what you were trying to create with this sort of preventative measures with employers and employees?
Well, my first exposure actually was to Frank Wagner,
Mm.
okay, who really is, I think, kind of the architect, or maybe the principal architect on the whole system that we have. I mean, I think he took Marshall's insights, and I think Frank really took ownership to try to codify it and develop it into a structure. So my first really exposure was with Frank, and a great benefit. And Frank's been a great mentor to me, and frankly, he kind of rescued me in a certain way because I had when I decided to make this change, I got trained in a coaching methodology that is pretty conventional.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty ICF, and I'm not disrespecting ICF, but it's pretty conventional. And I was finding it just didn't work for me. Okay. And I thought, you know what? I don't think I can be a coach under this kind of system. It just doesn't fit my background. And so when I met Frank and got to know a little bit more about this method, stakeholder centered coaching, and then got trained and certified, and then Frank helped me with some early engagements, I had kind of an aha moment that this methodology fits me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that actually kind of resuscitated my coaching career.
And what was your response when you felt that? I mean, I hear coaches. Well, I'll share personally. I mean, when I first learned the methodology, my first thought was to go way overboard with it. And boy, I got to do this at home. I got to do this with my family. I need to do this with my friends and
Mm-hmm.
community. What was your response when you first read about what the process is and how it works?
Well, when I first read about it, I thought this sounds great, but proof's in the pudding.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggled at first. I was certified in both the individual and the group coaching, and it was a struggle. And I tell newly certified coaches, don't assume you got it down. I mean, unless you're, 12 times as talented and smarter than I am, there's just no way you've got this down.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's technically speaking simple. It ain't easy. Simple and easy are not synonyms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so that's one of the reasons also the pro bono program that I helped launch is to get people experienced and then have more senior people like Frank or now myself help you through that. Because even after those, 4 days of programming, and even with Frank's additional and additional reading, you know, I was still an apprentice.
Hmm.
I was still an apprentice. And so it was really at some point that it just starts to click,
Hmm.
and you start to just, now you get it.
Yeah, I've heard coaches describe this as, I mean, like riding a bike. That you will, well, when you go through your stages of consciousness and competence, like when you
Yeah.
get on, you're going to be wobbly, but at a certain point, you just stop wobbling and you maintain momentum, and you can stop and start fairly
Yeah.
easily. How long did it take you to get to that point of even just conscious competence where you know what you're doing, you're thinking about it a lot, but by and large, it's running smoothly? How many engagements would you say that took you?
I don't know about number of engagements,
Hmm.
because one benefit I had was like I had access to Frank.
Hmm.
So he could debrief me. He could tell me where I screwed up and how I screwed up. And so, but I'd say it was at least a year, at least a
Hmm.
year, and at least, you know, a half dozen engagements. Now, I can tell you, because I mentor people now, there are people that get this a lot faster than I did.
Hmm.
And maybe that was just my stubbornness as an attorney or whatever. But I've had people, uh, you know, do a lot better than I did a lot sooner.
Hmm.
People that I'm mentoring or have mentored. But for me, for whatever reason, I'd say it was, at least 3 or 4 engagements in about a year. But yeah, I'm not going to win a prize for, alacrity. Okay.
Whew. Good news, Jathan. As you know, we don't give out prizes for who gets it fastest. But boy, if we did, I don't think I'd be qualified for that either.
Yeah.
You're right. It takes time. Marshall always describes this as simple but not easy, and I think that you've nailed that with the two not being synonyms. Um,
Mhm.
but was there anything that you did, other than actually practicing, that had a significant impact on your ability to reach that level of conscious competence?
Hmm. Boy, it's a great question. Well, one lesson, and I don't know if I learned it through this system or otherwise, is the less my ego was engaged, the more effective I was. And I think that somehow played into this. And once I could disengage my ego, and I slip now
Mhm.
and then. I mean, that ego's always there. But once I could kind of disengage or suspend the ego, my effectiveness as a coach just jumped.
It sounds like there's a very serious story behind this lesson. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, there's probably more than one, but I'll just, for the sake of our audience's,
Yeah.
digestion, I'll leave it to one. So I was coaching a CEO and over a period of time, and we had become friends. We were friends too. It wasn't just a pure client relationship. And so when I was in town, I would, be invited over his family for dinner, and it was a very nice thing. And well, anyway, the topic came up where I had perceived, because I'd worked with him before he was CEO, that now as CEO, where essentially he doesn't have a boss. I mean, he was also on the chairman of the board, so he no longer had a, but before, when I worked with him, he was senior, but he wasn't the top person. He was now the top person. Okay. Accountable to himself. And I said, some of those old things, those old bad habits that we worked on have crept back in. And he disagreed with me. And I held my guns. And but and he started to get a little worked up, and I started to get a little worked up. And then judgment went out the window, because we were having this conversation where his wife and an adult child were present, and they joined in. And guess whose side they took? Hmm. And it didn't. I was like, talk about cringing. In fact, I just shut up. And I was like, I wish I could put this genie back in the bottle, because they took it over.
Mhm.
And they were, listen to him, listen to your coach, listen. It's like, oh my God, what have I done?
Mhm.
So anyway, he fired me with 3 F-bombs. And I was a little afraid he was going to also throw in maybe a right hook or, a shovel punch to the kidney or something. He didn't, thank goodness. And years later, we did reconcile. And he did acknowledge that I was right
Mm.
and that it had a profound impact on him. But he also said, you really hurt me. And that pains me to this day.
Mm. Mm.
And I had no business doing what I did when I did. Even though I was right,
Mhm.
I was wrong.
Mhm. So
So that's an example. But I don't want to, go too far, because then I'm going to have to schedule a therapy session right after this session.
Good. Well, luckily I'm not a licensed therapist, but I know that we have a couple other master coaches I'm interviewing upcoming who are. So we do have people we can refer you to.
Resources. Good.
We do. We have resources, and luckily you're already connected with quite a few of them. But if you could go back to that the moment just before the family started chiming in, what would you do different?
Well, one, I wouldn't do it in his home at all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I wouldn't do it in a setting that's supposed to be social. It wasn't a working event. It was a social event.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I would have been, especially a message that there's going to be resistance and it's going to cause some pain to be received. You want to really think about what is an optimal setting for a very challenging conversation. And that was absolutely not it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I've had some very heavy conversations, heavier than that one, with clients I'm coaching. But ever since then, though, I think about timing and environment,
Mm-hmm.
not simply the message. Timing, environment.
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches struggle with turning off the coaching feature in their operating system. That everywhere they are, they're on as a coach. Did you struggle with that as well as an attorney?
No, it's not. It's not, because with law, it's a very defined system,
Mm.
whereas coaching is much more amorphous. Anybody can be a coach. Not anybody can be a lawyer. Anybody can provide coaching analysis, but only specifically trained people can provide legal analysis. Now, that doesn't mean that untrained people don't do it,
Mm-hmm.
but you see it. It's like, okay, fine, that's your analysis. So no, I think it's easier to turn it on and off as a lawyer sometimes than it is as a coach,
Mm.
because there's a real clear line with law that really isn't with coaching.
Jathan, it's so fascinating to me how your career has spanned such a broad range of activities, and yet, as your profile so readily confirms, you have achieved marked success in each domain. Now, because we have a personal relationship, as you're discussing these let's call them trials that you're going through, I know that it wasn't always this easy on paper. So perhaps now we can turn our attention a little bit to the emotional journey of that transition, as well as some of the missteps that I think invariably afflict all of us when we get started. So one area that coaches frequently report friction to me is in transitioning from their current career into their coaching career. This is especially true for people in very high level functions like yourself, as it is for senior leaders who take up coaching as an end of career or a retirement strategy. And I think the most commonly reported fear relates to the changes in predictability of income and how that news is received by the family and the support network. There's too many stories about this. Now, full disclosure, I've never been an attorney, but I am willing to bet that there is quite a discrepancy between the median earning capacity of a licensed attorney and a junior leadership coach just starting out. So Can you tell us a little bit about how that conversation, the transition conversations unfolded with your family and how they received the news?
Yes, and I'll speak to it in two ways. One is my personal one, and the other is this is something that I've helped people address that have wanted to move into the coaching profession. Okay, now in my case, I've been incredibly fortunate because my wife Marjorie has always put a premium on, are you happy at work? And so, even before moving from law, and you're right, by the way, yes, I mean, if profession to profession, now there's coaches that are highly paid. I'm one of them. But overall, profession to profession, it's definitely favors law from an income standpoint. But like I said, I've been very blessed to have a spouse that's always said, I want you happy at work. That's number one. Okay. So even before moving out of law, because I'm no longer licensed, I'm not, the law's gone. I left a partnership in a, established, reputable firm, nice income, nice benefit package, etc. And I was bored. I felt like, is this it? I did it. I achieved it. Now what? And so I left and started my own boutique with no guarantees. 3 young kids. Okay, and my wife was the primary caregiver, and so, it was pretty scary. So that's my personal. So shout out to Marjorie for her support. Now, I've talked to a lot of folks that aren't necessarily in that same spot for various reasons. And what I say is, and I've sometimes had those conversations with the spouse that is feeling the anxiety. And what I like to ask them is, and not in a crass way, but it's what's the value of having a spouse that's happy at work versus a spouse that's unhappy at work? What's that worth? As a way to kind of put it in perspective and maybe willing to take some of a risk. Because my experience is when spouses are unhappy at work, it doesn't stay at work. It comes home. And it's not a blessing to the other spouse. In fact, there was a study done, I think it was the University of Iowa, that studied stress levels. And when somebody was stressed at work and they came home and they shared it, their stress level remained the same high level. The only difference was that their spouse's stress level went way up to match theirs. Thank you, honey, for sharing. So one of the things I try to say is put into the mix the intangible but very important value of being married to somebody or a significant other that's happy at work versus unhappy. So that's kind of the first thing. Mm-hmm. Then the second thing is I try to say is get with somebody that knows finances. I mean, in my case, I went to my financial planner and I said, how long can I go without making a dime? And he analyzed my finances. And in my case, he said 2 years. So I said, well, if I can't make a dime in 2 years, I'm going back to law. And then I'll just shrug my shoulders, say it wasn't meant to be. So there's the emotional component, okay? The impact on a family of a spouse who enjoys what he or she is doing versus the other. And then there's, I say, just get a clear economic picture. Because the other thing that I tell some people is, there may be some low-hanging fruit, but it's really not the kind of fruit that you want to eat. Mm. Okay? And so be able to at least evaluate it. And even if you're going to get paid X, is it pulling you in the wrong direction? So I have these conversations with people, as part of my mentoring work.
Mm-hmm. It seems like quite the rare case to have a spouse who's so abundantly supportive despite the odds. And coaches that I have interacted with, a very small percentage of them are in that position. So I'd like to ask, since you've got the floor, because she was so supportive, did that solidify your decision in your mind? Did that make it easier, or did the opposite happen, where if she's so trusting of me, then boy, I really better do twice as much as I was doing before? Or did that make you second guess the fact that she was so supportive?
I still felt pressure. I
Mm-hmm.
still felt, but I don't know that it impacted it. Put it this way. Um, if she'd taken a different approach, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't have her support, it was scary enough, independent of her support. It's scary enough. Giving up a sure thing for an unknown, okay? And knowing at a minimum, you're going to take it a short term at best. The best case scenario, you're still going to take at least a short term hit, and it could be a long term hit. Okay, so that is enough right there to be a boatload of anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't think I could have pulled it off without her saying, if you think this is going to make you happy, and if you have a business plan where you think you can be responsible, and we might have to, suffer a bit in the transition, let's give it a shot.
So when when she communicates the support and says, you do need to have a business plan and, do this well, what were you able to do to quash their fears? I mean, there's quite a bit of uncertainty. What did you do to sort of reinforce, or maybe what did you do with your business plan to have her look at this and say, yeah, this is a pretty viable or seemingly viable direction?
Well, and again, maybe I've just been very lucky that way, because there never has been she's never expressed a fear that I had to quash. In fact, we have this like funny sort of thing that's followed us, even back in the days when I had my own law firm, and clients come, clients go, right? Some years are better than others. So there was always that independent piece. Once I had my own firm, I was no longer on a flat salary. It was, feast or famine kind of thing. And so she has heard me after like some contracts end, and and I look around and I go, oh my gosh, the cupboard is nearly bare. What am I going to do now? And she just is always she shakes her head and go, gosh, I've heard this so many times. Okay, here we go again. Yeah, I know, honey. It's it. You've lost. It's over. Give it up. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, because she always says it always changes. And so that's been kind of with her. It's more so I get no sympathy when I go, oh, damn, that's 3 contracts that just ended. What am I going to do to fill that in? And so I'm more the hyper, the crazy one about, oh no, what am I going to do? And I get no sympathy. She's like, okay, all right, fine. All right. I've heard this so many times, here we go again. Yeah, I know. It's you're never going to recover. This is it. It's the final blow, Jathan. Fine. Okay. And I'm like, all right. So I'm like, I don't even want to bother anymore. I got to find somebody else I can talk to the wall and say, hey, I'm really nervous. I just lost 3 great contracts. They just ended. What am I going to do?
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
So support is kind of the antithesis then of sympathy. She's so supportive that you're not getting the sympathy. You're getting the, hey, right. Come on, Jathan, pull up your bootstraps, get going.
But bottom line, I'll take that over the other.
Oh yeah, of course, any day. So then, at this point in the story, you have your family's buy-in, and it seems like the only thing to do was, to get started. But there's still that nagging problem that kind of itches at the roof of our mouth when we get started, which is self-doubt. And a couple weeks ago, I interviewed Master Coach Bill Zeeb, whom I believe you are also well connected with. And we broached the topic of imposter syndrome, because I think this is really relevant for coaches, especially ones getting started, and especially those who have reached a significant level of success like yourself. Was this something that you faced then, and is this something that you face now?
I would say yes and yes.
What does it look like for you? How does imposter syndrome or self-doubt manifest?
Currently, and I don't know if it's imposter syndrome or just I need to get realistic. But I think we've talked a little bit about this, Brandon. But I'm working with Frank Wagner and others about really taking an organization development approach to stakeholder centered coaching, where it's no longer simply one-on-one, one leader, one coach, one leader, one coach, but where we're talking about transforming organizations to have a coaching culture. And I've been very much immersed in that space. And so, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome or just recognizing that, there was a learning curve that I still need and still working on. And so my sort of humbling thing more recently has been the challenges of trying to scale a system of coaching through an entire organization. And I think when I first plunged into this, I think I was a little naive, wave the magic wand, they all live happily ever after. And so that's still a work in progress. And I'm working with Frank on that and developing it, because I see it as also a future for our coaches to not to eliminate the current model, but to supplement it, augment it for organizations that are not only interested in individual leaders getting better, but their culture getting better. And
absolutely.
buy into the concept of coaching as not just an individual development thing, but as an organization development thing.
Yeah,
so I'm still very much in the learning curve, and I've been humbled.
When I think of the work that you're doing, the impact that it's having, and the vision for what you're working on, I see it very much like a workout program. You can go online and you can buy yourself an out-of-the-box, beginning to end, 12-week Get Fit workout program, and chances are you're going to get very much better, assuming that you do the work. But there are those at the elite levels who will need some tailoring of this program, or who need some special. There will be people at the bottom rungs who need additional accountability and support, and there will be people at the upper rungs of their fitness who need customization and let's say some additional prodding to make that work. But I think it's important. Can you tell me a little bit about the program that you're working on with OD?
Yeah, well, it will encompass essentially three things. One is the core components of stakeholder centered coaching. Basically the DNA, the present DNA of stakeholder centered coaching. Second is it'll incorporate the group coaching element of stakeholder centered coaching. So there's the one-on-one, which is still the driver, the main thing. There's the group. And then the third is essentially system alignment. So if a leader of an organization wants a coaching culture, okay, he or she is going to have to buy into, if they work with us, first of all, the fundamental principles of how you develop a leader. That's stakeholder centered coaching, Marshall Goldsmith core. 2 is how do you do the initial scaling, which is at the group level. And then 3 is analysis of your systems to make sure they're in alignment, that they're supporting a coaching culture versus the opposite, which is more often the case when we get involved. So that's really where we're going, and what Frank and I are working on to develop and help train and support our coaches so they can be deployed in this way for organizations that are interested.
Now, Jathan, you've piqued my curiosity. You especially with this third point where you have this misalignment. What's your prescription for that?
It's a willingness to change. It's really, if you go back to core principles of stakeholder centered coaching, well, what are they? Okay, humility, courage, discipline. Humility is the willingness to say, you know what, maybe I ain't perfect, right? Maybe there is room to grow, and maybe it ain't all their fault, okay? So let's say you have this fancy schmancy compensation system, okay? I had a workplace violence case over a CFO's compensation system. Time permitting, I can share it. Point being is, this CFO was ego invested in the system. There was no humility. And it was, instead of creating what they wanted to create, it created the opposite. So humility is, are you willing to look at how you evaluate people, how you hire people, how you compensate people, how you promote people, how you do learning and development, how your benefits are, how your leaves of absence policies are. Are you willing to look at all of that, okay, and assume none of them are sacred cows? That's humility. Courage is, we're going to try some stuff, and undoubtedly we're going to make some mistakes and have failures. Do you have the courage to withstand that? And then discipline is follow up and follow through. Organization change isn't overnight, right? It's your giant ocean liner making a change. It's going to take time to make that move. So it really comes down to those three fundamental tenets of the core of SEC coaching. It's just done at a system level in this case.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we pivot to talk a little bit more about the failures that happen along the way of building a coaching career, I'd love to ask you with vulnerability, and I'll volunteer to go first, of these three characteristics, courage, humility, and discipline. All three of them are important. All three of them need to be very high. You personally, as an individual, which one of these three is your weak point? Have a think. I'm happy to go first. Happy to let you go first.
I'd say discipline.
Discipline. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
I get excited about things,
mm-hmm.
and it can draw my attention away. So when I look back on some of the things that I could have done better, it's usually because there wasn't sufficient follow-up and follow-through.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's easy. If there's one of those three, okay, I mean, I think people that work with me would have no problem with humility. They know I'm a risk taker. Courage isn't a problem. But sometimes where I fall short is the follow-up, follow-through. That's discipline.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you, Jathan. We're probably rowing in the same direction. Discipline is the tough one, and from a very non-scientific standpoint, my observational data, having worked with certified now 3,500 or so coaches out of the 4,500 in our network, discipline seems to be one of the common factors amongst coaches. I'd be curious. So, ladies and gentlemen, courage, humility, and discipline. If you're a stakeholder centered coach, you know what that means. Send us an email, podcast@mgscc.net. Which of these three is your weak point? Between courage, humility, and discipline, for Jathan and I, it's both discipline. But on the flip, so ladies and gentlemen, send us an email. Tell us what you think. Jathan, what about with your clients? Do you find any common themes amongst those three?
Well, I find all three.
All three.
Yeah, all three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that, all three.
Yeah. So I think, we talk a lot about becoming a coach. We talk a lot about what it's like to be a coach. I think that the under-discussed elephant is that there are no coaches that I have ever known, met, interviewed, or watched, listened to, or read about who started and reached a high level of success without some pretty spectacular failures along the way. And because this is such an opaque industry, both between suppliers and buyers, but also amongst the suppliers, I'd love to take a minute and talk about, what were your big failures, or did you ever have a moment, especially when you were starting out, that you banged your head against the wall and said, that's it, I've either made the wrong decision or I need to abandon ship? What were your biggest failures, and what did you learn from them along the way?
Well, I mean, I think the story I shared with you earlier certainly falls in the category of failure, and certainly caused, and even to this day, makes me wince. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm not saying that's the only example, but certainly that I would consider that a failure. Even though, notwithstanding that years later, this CEO said I was right, I still consider it a failure. It was a professional failure on my part. Okay. So So, and that's actually where I've had to really watch myself is in that space. Like sometimes, going back to humility, courage, and discipline, sometimes I'll get too courageous and or maybe not so humble, where I'll challenge somebody in a way that isn't productive.
Hmm.
So I sometimes have to watch myself. And maybe it's because, when you tried cases and you litigated cases, you're not bashful,
Hmm.
you're not afraid of a verbal scrap. And so sometimes I have to catch myself and say, no, no, Jathan, take a deep breath. Okay. Let's zen our way through this.
Hmm. Yes, I distinctly remember the first time I made a pretty, let's say, a pretty obvious blunder while I was sitting in the room having a conversation with Marshall, and I felt this warm hand on my forearm, and he just started doing this, and I was like, what's going on? He's like, let it go, let
Yeah.
it go. And as soon as I feel that hand, anytime since then, I think, oh boy, I really messed something up here, didn't I? Thank you, Marshall.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just let it go.
Well, my experience with Marshall, corrective Marshall, has to do with his thing about no, but, and however.
Tell
So I'm
us.
having this conversation and he's interrupting me left and right. Oh, you just said no. What? No, did I? Oh, you just said it again. It's like, but I didn't mean, you just said but. It's like, oh my God. I can't talk to this guy. So those three words now are like,
Yeah.
I run from them.
Yep.
No, but, and however. You don't ever use those around Marshall, okay?
Mhm.
Because he takes no prisoners.
Yes, and it feels so good the first time he does it. No, I think none of us feel good when it happens, but I think it's fair to say that anyone with sufficient humility is going to walk away and say, "Boy, yeah, I should probably make some changes." But on the topic of failures, entrepreneurship is such a huge piece of being a coach. Again, it's another piece that I'm personally very passionate about in an area that I think is under discussed. The under discussed side of being a coach. So when we think about failures and we think about you starting your coaching practice as well as having your law firm, did you make any critical errors or have any particular failures in the domain of entrepreneurship that you thought would be your ruins?
Well, I think going back to when I started my own law firm, I think the way I managed the firm
Mm-hmm.
was its potential ruin because I really was not a good manager. And I really didn't know what I was doing and brought a whole lot of, I think, pain and suffering into my organization that could have been avoided. I didn't have a coach and could desperately, in hindsight, have used a coach.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one that jumps to mind for me is how I managed or mismanaged people in my organization,
Mm-hmm.
which I think in a way informs my work to this day, 20 some odd years later.
As we discuss the fears and the failures that get in the way of starting, and also that seem to be more and more pronounced the harder we work at this whole coaching career thing, I'm reminded of the wisdom from Dale Carnegie, who is quoted who is cited as the source of a quote, something to the effect of, do that which you fear to do and keep on doing it, because this is the quickest and surest way ever discovered to conquer a fear. Figure out what you don't want to do and then do that again and again. You, Jathan, have a demonstrable track record of doing the hard things first. And I know you coach others to do the same thing, both in your one-on-one work as well as with your authorship. So tell me some of the ways that this hard-won wisdom has affected your clients.
Well, what I'd add another quote to the Dale Carnegie quote, which I use in my work, which is from the poet Robert Frost. The best way out is always through. And what I've seen is in the workplace, what goes wrong is people don't follow that dictum or the Dale Carnegie dictum. Instead, they avoid that challenging conversation. They avoid that issue. They rationalize it'll go away by itself, or maybe some third party will fix it. And so what happens is the problem then festers. In fact, every case I ever litigated was a product of avoidance. Of there was an issue, and instead of being addressed directly and proactively, it was ignored or dealt with passively aggressively, and then it festered, and then it turned toxic. So one of the lessons I use in my coaching work that it goes all the way through my entire career, including my law work, is don't let it fester. Don't let the elephant in the room get any bigger. Don't try to carve a path around the elephant. Okay? It's just going to get worse. So just about every working day, I'm coaching somebody on an upcoming confront the elephant conversation. Today's no exception.
Oh, have you got a client working on that right now?
Oh, yeah. I've got multiple clients working on them. I mean, before this call, this interview, I just got off a coaching session that's just on that very, very topic.
Well, you're quite well known in our circles as someone who does a great job melding together multiple disciplines into surprisingly effective and repeatable processes that managers and senior leaders can use. And this I've seen be abundantly visible in your work with tools like your same-day summaries, the no fear confrontation method, and the crossroads conversations, just to name a few. And you recently talked about this in your most recent SHRM publication, the 3 tools to replace conventional employee discipline, for which we'll include a link down below for the audience. Can you briefly, maybe talk about these tools for anyone who hasn't yet been following you?
Yes. In my humble opinion, the HR profession has taken the wrong turn in certain ways. And one of them is to combat wrongful discharge lawsuits. This notion grew starting, I think, really more in the 80s into the 90s and so forth, that we have to create bulletproof documentation so that if we fire somebody or discipline somebody, we can't get sued. Or if we get sued, we won't lose. So it gave birth to this notion of progressive discipline, which to me is an ultimate contradiction in terms. Progressive discipline is anything but progressive, okay? So it's basically with sort of an employee does something you don't like as the boss, so you give them a verbal counsel. All right, another problem. Well, now we're going to go into warning 1 or warning 2 or written warning or final warning or performance improvement plan, and then we're going to include all this wonderful legalistic language like, and further violations will result up to and including summary dismissal, okay, and all this garbage. And all I found in my legal career was it was, great for the legal profession for a variety of reasons that we could go into, but I won't because it's a coaching call, not a legal call or an HR call. But anyway, so rather than just say this system sucks, which it does, in that article I say here's an alternative. How about do it this way instead? And that's what the 3 tools are about: is throw all that conventional performance, all that conventional stuff out the window and then replace it with this. That's what the article's about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the sort of provocative ending. It was almost like you crawled right inside my head when you said, some of you might be skeptical about this. You might be thinking, will this work? Won't it work? Here's why it won't work, or here's why it could. But I love how you opened the door and said, fire away. Tell me what's on your mind. I'll address each and every one of your concerns in a follow-up publication. And that was published just, we're sitting here January 10th. That was published near the end of December. So maybe I should ask, when is the next episode?
Next week.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Next week. I think the publishers said they're going to run my follow-up column next week, because I did hear from a whole bunch of folks throughout the country. All of them intrigued, and some enthusiastically intrigued, and some skeptically intrigued. All intrigued. So I got, well, what about? And what about? And da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da. So the follow-up column, I'm told, will be published sometime next week.
Okay.
So I just submitted it, actually.
Well, just for fun, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening at home, if you're watching at home or listening in the car, if you have read the article that Jathan's published in SHRM, write to us, podcast@mgscc.net. Let us know if you would like us to do a whole separate session on those topics and those tools to change from progressionary discipline to this sort of new method. Because I think, Jathan, it would be something that's valuable for leaders. It's exceptionally good advice for managers. And why shouldn't every coach have this in their pocket as well? So anyway, we'll park that. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to hear more, let us know. We'll use your responses as the litmus test for whether there is demand for this. But I'll look out for that next week, Jathan. Thank you for sharing it. How do you combine these wonderful tools with stakeholder centered coaching?
I haven't. They've just sort of seamlessly kind of fit. I guess I haven't really thought through it. I'd like to take credit for some big genius insight, but it's just kind of happened organically, and then I extract elements of it. For example, coaching people on reframing feedback into feed forward. That's a classic Goldsmithism. Okay? Seamless fit. What I call the 3-3-1. Up to 3 strengths, up to 3 growth areas, which one to focus on first. Organically work it in. Mini survey concepts. Okay? Let's objectively measure change in perception. Has this person gotten better at X? +3, -3. So it's more of an organic integration than a thoughtful plan. I'll confess.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. In some of my conversations with other coaches, they have described stakeholder centered coaching almost like seed beds or raised beds for your garden, that you're going to have a very clean, boxed in system that you can use and follow. But as you modify it for each individual use case, each leader, each stakeholder, new tools or ways of usage sort of sprout out from that. So I think what's so cool about the tools you've talked about here is they are effective standalone tools, and they also work well integrated with stakeholder centered coaching, but they don't have to be separate. So, I'm curious, Jathan, having all of these integrated tools in your toolkit, I would imagine gives a nice boost to your confidence in pursuing prospective clients. How has it affected you to have both stakeholder centered coaching and a law background and HR, OD, L&D experience? How has this affected your coaching practice?
It's been fantastic. In a word. Fantastic.
Sure. Do you feel, something we commonly hear from coaches, whether they're new or veterans, is that it's just difficult to start the conversation or to go in with confidence. Part of that has to do with just how wildly differentiated each coach is, such that the buyers don't actually know the difference in offerings. But yours are well articulated. They're well published and well respected. Does that make it, do you struggle, or do you have any apprehension when you're speaking with a new client, or does it sort of just feel like, hey, here's what I do. If you like it, great. If not, no problem.
Well, I've moved to a place that's a nice place to be. I haven't always been in that place. And so, like what I tell younger coaches or people starting out or relatively newbies in this business is, if it all works out, you're going to be a 10-year, 12-year overnight success.
It's a good way
That's
to
how
put
it's
it.
going to work. If you're lucky, maybe it'll be a 6-year and you're an overnight success.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But just understand that's how it's going to work.
Yeah.
So you're just going to have to keep chipping away until you're an overnight success.
Yep. That's the part of discipline that many coaches,
Yeah.
it's the hard thing we don't want to accept.
Yeah. And they like the overnight success part. And
Yeah.
there's truth to it. There really is truth to it. It's just that overnight success is going to be preceded by a lot of time and a lot of effort.
I remember a conversation I was having with Marshall in his study of his home in Rancho Santa Fe some years back. And I remember a group of people who were coaches, consultants, psychologists. They came into the room and quite unabashedly said, Marshall, we want to do exactly what you do, just like you do it. We want to, fly around and coach high-level leaders, and we want to do all of these things and, rub shoulders with the who's who. And Marshall very thoughtfully stopped, and this was before his beard, but he stopped and touched his chin, and he said, okay, so what do you want me to do? They said, how do you do it? Tell us your secret. And he stopped and said, well, I would start with writing 40 books, have them translated into 35 languages, get 10 million miles on your frequent flyer card, and, then come back and I'll give you step 2. And they didn't love that answer. But again, it's the discipline. It's you're going to be an overnight success, maybe.
It's like me saying, you'll be a 20-year overnight success. That's always my opening line.
Yeah.
Maybe you can beat 20 years. But that's essentially how it's going to be.
So remind me, Jathan, how many years have you been in formalized coaching?
Well, in formalized coaching, maybe a dozen years.
Okay.
10, 12 years, somewhere in there.
And in that time frame, what were some of the big highlights, the big highlights that stay with you? It may have been a particular client, or it may have just been a moment of learning for someone. What stuck with you?
Well, one highlight that continues is when I coach an executive, and not only is it successful in the workplace, but they share with me how it has translated in their home, in their community, family, that the things that we worked on for them to be better in the workplace have crossed over into these other environments. That continues to be a source of motivation for me.
Oh, yeah. Do you have any stories that you could share with us?
Wow. Sure. Boy. 2 sisters that hadn't talked to each other for years, using the no fear confrontation technique. Father, son, Midas touch apology, reset button in their relationship.
Wow.
Yeah, spouses, family members, church position, person has a church job, how it's changed in his church position. Professional speaker, changed how he addresses audiences. It wasn't part of the gig, but it and how it's, people tell me it's helped him better at sales, even though that wasn't part of the gig. I mean, this, it's hard to sort of identify this one or that one, because it's just such an ongoing thing.
Oh, yeah.
That I expect that if we're successful in the workplace, there'll be collateral benefits. And that's pretty much always the case.
It is. And that's the beauty of stakeholder centered coaching, right? We're not going to pick how you just engage with one direct report and work on that. We're not going to take each individual case and say, how do you untangle this knot?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to say, let's create a system that can pick any one growth area and get better at it measurably from the eyes of everyone else who's affected by that behavior. And so if we are successful to any degree, it should affect your home life. It should affect how you engage with your community, with your friends. But of course, it's going to impact what you do in your job. So, that's something that's very clearly at the top of mind for someone like you, for someone like me. And I'd love to talk a little bit about what you, so our coaching methodology, and if you're a certified coach here, you know this, that what we do is very systematic. It means that you can expect roughly equivalent results regardless of which coach you work with. And so we encourage coaches to develop their own subject matter expertise and differentiate themselves by that added value that they bring to an engagement. So Jathan, I'd love to know from your side, you've spent all of this time niching into your own subject matter expertise as a coach. Describe that niche to us, and maybe the question is, why do clients choose Jathan Janove over the slew of other coaches that they could be working with?
Well, let's see. There's a few, a couple that immediately go to mind, and one was triggered by something you said about the system approach. I do both. I parachute into toxic relationships to help them hit the reset button. So that's another thing, is kind of workplace toxicity or relationship toxicity. So I will do specific interventions in addition to the overall methodology. So that's one area. Somewhat related is, I think I've developed a kind of reputation as, I don't know if this is what I would call it, but like the jerk whisperer. Okay. So I seem to do especially well with high level, highly charged people that are perceived as intimidating and abrasive and so forth. And I have a pretty strong track record of working with those folks and helping them hit the reset button. Still maintaining that high charge, high expectation, high results drive, but doing it more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another area that I get, and there's some folks that they know, like, if this is really difficult, I've been brought in as the coach of the last resort after other coaches, the change didn't happen. And so that's another area. And then I mentioned earlier the system stuff and the HR stuff. So, those areas are the areas that tend to produce work for me.
Mm-hmm. And when you're brought in, you mentioned being brought in as that last resort coach. What goes through your mind, your first day on campus, when you're thinking, okay, I'm third in line, the first two batters have struck out, this really relies on me. What's going through your mind at that moment?
What's going through my mind is, this is fun.
Yeah.
Really, truth be told. And sometimes, and very often I'm not popular initially because they've been forced to, right? Mm-hmm. Either that or lose their job, right? And so, and they've got this wonderful, 6-figure package and whatnot, and they don't want to lose it. And, they've eaten up the other coaches, and now they got me. And I just find that fun. And in fact, I even find it fun when they try to intimidate me. I just find it amusing. And then they kind of get the idea it's probably not going to work. So then it's like, well, where do we go from here? So I actually enjoy it. I mean, I talked to another master coach in Stakeholder Centered Coaching, and she said she will not take those engagements. And I said, I like those engagements. I want those engagements. Plus the upside. Plus the upside. Yeah, go ahead. The upside, the potential upsides. Because, again, not just in the workplace, but everywhere. Home, community, I mean, one was one kudo I got. Okay, this type A MD, high compensation, high this, high that, ambitious drive. You know, he's a hammer, you're a nail kind of guy, right? And so he called me and he said, I have to thank you for not being thrown in jail. And I said, oh, tell me more. So he said, well, he was on his way with his older kids up to a ski resort. There was some kind of accident on kind of the winding mountain road, and traffic was blocked. And he's a very impatient guy, and he's in his fancy schmancy Mercedes and et cetera, et cetera. And so, police are there with some kind of accident in there. They're motioning people to stop and stay. And he starts getting frustrated. And he said, the hell with this. So he kind of pulls into the emergency lane, which was being kept clear for emergency vehicles, and starts to try to see if he can inch past this. Okay. And, cop comes over. I'm going to throw your ass in. I mean, he's just like, this cop is just white hot. How dare you? Okay. And so the MD said, the old me would have just gone right back at him. And I'm sure I just would have been thrown in jail because, I'd have effed him and this, that, and the other. And I'm busy and I'm a doctor and I've got this and that and the other and blah, blah, blah. And so he said, instead I did the verbal Aikido technique. And he said, what was really cool was then the cops said, tell you what, get out of the left lane, pull into the other lane, follow me. So the cop gets into his car, the squad car, and he leads him through the whole mess to clearance. And he said, so he's able to move past all of this completely stopped traffic on this mountain road toward the ski resort. And he's now free and clear and off to go skiing.
Wow.
So he said, in that moment, when this cop is, what, how dare you pull into the, And he said, and I know I'm just about to go right back at him. I'm a doctor, I'm this, I'm that, and the other. And he said, I just went into Aikido. And then the next thing you know, I get a lift out of the mess.
That's amazing.
So those are, it's just fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, he would fall into that kind of high maintenance, JERK category.
Mm-hmm. For those who don't know verbal Aikido, I mean, I'm a huge proponent myself. Can you give a brief primer on what it is?
Yeah, and maybe maybe put one of the articles in the chat or something. Or if you need a link, I can send you a link if you don't have one handy. But yeah, essentially, it's a martial art. It's based on the physical martial art of Aikido, which in a nutshell is based on the idea of self-defense, but where no one gets hurt. So by contrast, years ago, I trained in karate. Karate was defensive. However, if you're attacked, you could permissibly injure or kill your attacker. The basic building block was block, strike. Attack comes, you block the attack, you strike the attacker. Aikido is based on a principle of instead of block an attack or strike, you engage. You take the attacker's energy, you move with them, you turn with them, you preserve your balance while they're struggling to gather their balance. You preserve your energy while they're expending their energy. The whole point is so you can move them into a position where they can't hurt you and you don't have to hurt them. That's Aikido. And you can take that same concept and apply it to verbal attacks.
Mm-hmm. What does that look like in practice?
So when the cop says to the doctor, what the F is the matter with you? How dare you pull into the haba hooba haba ha, waving his finger? That's a verbal attack. How do you engage? You can go fight. Well, you just stupid ass cop. Blah. You can go flight, put the car in reverse and jam your way down there. That's not a good idea. Or you can just freeze and go hubba, 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 wubba. Or you can engage. Well, let's take a look at it. My bad. What's, he was having a rough day, officer. Sounds like I've just made your day a little rougher. What's up?
Amazing.
Yeah, that's Aikido. That's verbal Aikido.
Jathan, the day that I read that article and we talked about, how to actually do this in practice, I was driving home later that day. I had my car on autopilot, so it's driving. And I guess I was following someone closely. Again, it's a computer driven, so I won't take responsibility for that. But I did take responsibility when the guy got out of his car at a stoplight and came up and said, what's your problem? And he's in this very shiny sports car, bright yellow, convertible, top down. He's got a couple girls with him. The guy is clearly looking for a fight. And he came up, hits my window. What's your problem? And I said, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh boy, this is going to be a fight. And I looked at him and I said, man, that car is just so yellow. I wanted to see it up close. Did I do something wrong? And then he started talking about his car. I thought, wow, what an incredible conversational technique to use as a manager when things go south, to have that in your pocket, pull it out and avoid the conflict altogether.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect example. Because now his brain is all scrambled,
Mm-hmm.
The last thing in the world he expected was to go, wow, that color yellow, And so his brain is going, he's trying to process. And that's what I mean. That's like he's now worried, hey, which way's up? Yeah. And then it's like, I don't really want to fight this guy. I think I'll just relax.
And it all just worked out somehow. But, I have to thank you, because I'm also able to do that with my kids, who obviously have their own set of conflicts coming up.
Yes.
Good. And then if you would entertain, a 2-minute description of the no fear confrontation method, because I think this is also something very powerful for people to have.
Sure. It begins with the ear, which is everybody I work with is going to hear about the ear, which is an active listening tool. It's a sequence: explore, acknowledge, respond, EAR. Okay. We're hardwired to just do our position, our thoughts. Our sentences disproportionately end in periods, not question marks. So explore means you genuinely try to find out what the other person thinks, how they feel, open-ended questions. E is where you have them acknowledge that you understand them. Key point. You understand them, not the other way around. Let me see if I understand you. Is this why you're upset? Person says yes, you've done the acknowledge. Now you can respond. It's a sequence. Person says no, you go back to the E. Sorry, what did I miss? So the fundamental listening building block is ear, EAR. Now, no fear confrontation is where you've got to initiate a tough conversation, or you're in the midst of something that all of a sudden turns tough. So I call it the no fear confrontation. And you simply add one element to the mix, and that's the F, which is frame. So what you do is you begin by framing the conversation, which is a direct, to the point, no beating around the bush, succinct statement of the problem or issue. And then you immediately pivot into the ear. Jim, there's a problem with your attendance that we need to discuss. Or Sarah, based on these issues we're having, I'm not sure you can continue here. Okay. You're right to it, but then you pivot into the ear. What do you think? What are your thoughts? How do you see it? Super open-ended. And then you let the active listening guide you. That's the no fear confrontation.
Yeah. And again, ladies and gentlemen, there will be a link in the show notes. Definitely encourage you to check this out. These are great tools that stand all on their own. You can use them as a coach. You can use them as a manager. And you can even use them, as I do, as a parent, as a family person, anywhere that you want. So, Jathan, it's been great to hear the ups and downs of your coaching career, and to know that through hard work and intense focus, that discipline that we talked about, the courage, humility, and discipline trifecta, as we can call it, that's allowed you to build this coaching life that you're quite proud of. And if I'm the audience member, I'm thinking, okay, well, boy, he sure started out as an attorney, and it seems like he maybe had a bit of a leg up. How on earth am I going to do that? So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this at home or listening on your daily commute, you might have the same question. So, Jathan, let's take a moment to recognize that question from our listeners, and address the burning question, perhaps with some kind of prescriptive advice, so that we can all have a chance to follow in your steps and improve our own career stories. So I'd like to ask your advice, Jathan. What advice would you give to someone who was similar to yourself? They're in a career, they're doing well, but they're starting to get pulled towards coaching. They're starting to build their interest in leadership, but they're not sure what to do yet. What advice would you have for that person?
Well, I mean, if you're not already certified, okay, I'd recommend you get certified, and I'd recommend you sign up to participate in our pro bono paying it forward program, where you'll get matched up with a leader in a nonprofit, people who can't afford corporate coaching rates, and you'll have a coaching engagement through it, and a more senior coach will be available as a resource for you. So it's also a great way to help with the learning curve that still exists even after you're certified or have gone through the basic instruction. That's the advice I give others. And if you're already certified, I say, well, why don't you participate in our pro bono program?
How does someone go about doing that? Who can they reach out to, or where can they go to?
Well, they can reach out to me. Another certified coach, Aaron Wheeler, is kind of helps coordinate it as well. But if they want to reach out to me, I can then forward it. And also, it's something where you can also reach out to, if you support a nonprofit and you want to coach a leader in that nonprofit, you can approach them with it and say that you'll use this system and you'll get support in doing so. So we can help find that person for you, or you can find the person, and then we'll give you support. And it counts toward your, if you want to become advanced or you want to become master, those engagements count the same as standard corporate engagements. For 6 months, it's typically with a 6-month engagement.
And what's your address? What address can people write to you at?
Jathan at stakeholdercenteredcoaching.com. Mm-hmm. That's probably the easiest.
Perfect. And we'll put a link to that down below. Good. So get certified, join the pro bono program to get your reps in, or build your mileage log, or just essentially get practice so that way you can improve. That would be the advice.
Yes. And sometimes those pro bono ones turn into paying ones. So that's the other thing is but yeah, that's what I would say is, get certified, but don't assume certification means mastery.
Yes.
So you need, and plus, frankly, my recommendation is, if you get some pro bono gigs under your belt, before somebody's paying you a bunch of money. Okay. I mean, if you can afford it, better to go that route than potentially jump in before you're really prime time and mess up a long-term income source.
Oh yeah.
So that's the other reason I think that the pro bono program can benefit our coaches, in addition, of course, to benefiting these great organizations.
Yeah, it's a wonderful program that you've put together, and I definitely encourage everyone to certainly check it out. Email Jathan, Jathan, at stakeholdercenteredcoaching.com. It's a great program. It will help you get your reps in. I say this almost weekly, and I don't think I'll stop saying it until the day I'm dead. But one of the best things you can do for selling coaching is to go in with a track record of clients you've worked with and results they've gotten from working with you. And one of the best things you can do to serve your paying clients is to not let them be your first engagement. Go out and make the mistakes somewhere else first. Friend, family member, an old college buddy. Coach someone to go through the motions, to get the muscle memory, so that way when you're sitting in front of the client, you're not thinking about, oh, what do I need to do next, and how do I do things well here? You're just on autopilot with your muscle memory, and you're present for the client. Yeah. So,
agree 100%.
And that brings me to the next question. You talked about some engagements where you are the last line of defense from coaching. If I'm a client and I have spent hundreds of thousands or millions on coaching, but I'm not really happy with the results, what advice do you have for these leaders?
Well, it's going to vary. But it's you want to find out why. There's a number of possible causes. If coaching isn't working, one is the coaches. I had an experience where I sometimes refer coaches, for clients, because I also have different roles. So I'm not necessarily going to coach certain people, or if I'm coaching the CEO, I'm not going to coach the VP of manufacturing too. So I've placed coaches. And I've had experiences where I placed people and they did a fantastic job. And I've had experiences where, including certified coaches, where they blew it. And it was on them, from what I could piece together. I've also had situations where it didn't work out, and it wasn't because of the coach, but it was because of the coachee. And in other cases where it wasn't necessarily the coachee per se or the coach, but the sponsor, which is in our terminology is usually the senior boss or whoever engages you, the board of directors or the CEO or whomever. And so I always want to look at do a root cause analysis. So I'd be saying to that leader, well, tell me more. Okay, so you made this investment in coaching, and I've heard this. I've been in this space where we spent all this money on all these coaches, and we haven't seen the results. All right, well, tell me more. But usually what I can find is coachee, coach, system, senior or top leadership system. Somewhere in that mix are the answers. And so if you're serious about wanting to make change, you got to be open to that. Because, if you're willing, if you're in that leadership position, senior leadership, we can produce results. Now, there are times where the result is that person moves on. Mm-hmm. Okay. And in fact, one way to really screw things up is to say, even though the coaching failed because the coachee is just not willing or able, now we'll look the other way. That's toxic. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's just basically feeding the virus. So there's a bunch of different things that go into it. But my point is, if you're the CEO or you're the board of a organization and you want a coaching culture or you want a healthy culture and you're serious, you'll get it. If you're serious, you'll get it. And I've known that from, studying people as a journalist, people like Alan Mullally at Ford, Doug Conant at Campbell's Soup Company, people that have come in as changed CEOs. And if they're willing to, if you persevere, you'll get there. So I've never encountered a situation where there couldn't have been success. Doesn't mean the success happens, but I've never encountered one where I said, we're stuck. We're stuck. So that's my approach and philosophy when involved in that kind of a situation.
As part of our methodology, we have a list of do's and don'ts for leaders. When you think about coaches, if we were to create that same do's and don'ts for coaches, to prescribe to them to build a fruitful, long-lasting, sustainable career that they enjoy and find meaning in, what is one or two things that you would put on that do's and don't list?
You mean aside from what I just said about getting certified and joining the pro bono program? Yeah. Well, one, I think I mentioned earlier, is your chances are you're going to be a long-term overnight success. Accept that. Okay. And don't give up. Don't give up. Keep chipping away. Keep chipping away. And then overnight you'll have that success. I mean, that to me is probably right up there, top advice.
Absolutely. Well, Jathan, we're nearing the top of our time together. For those of you at home, I want to invite you to join the conversation here and the conversations we'll have in the subsequent weeks. So if there's a question you'd like to ask or a coach you'd like to hear interviewed, drop us a line at podcast@mgscc.net. And if you're interested in learning more about our methodology, go to mgscc.net/sample course, all one word, sample course, to get instant access to the course Foundations of Stakeholder Centered Coaching, where you can learn the founding principles of our coaching methodology at no cost to you. And by the way, this includes exactly what we were talking about, courage, humility, and discipline as a founding principle of our methodology and as a requirement for the success Jathan's talking about, where if you are committed to doing this, you're going to get there one way or another. So, Jathan, it's been wonderful to have you. Before we say goodbye to our listeners, can you tell us how we can follow your story or get in touch with you? Where can we go to follow you?
Well, one of the things I do periodically, usually about once a month, is I collate various articles that relate to coaching and organization development, and I send them out to a group. So if people want to get on that list, you could email me and I'll add you to that list. So like, for instance, the next issue that comes out is going to have the 3 tools to replace progressive discipline and the follow-up Q&A column. So that's one way to stay connected with me, is to get that periodic e-letter that contains content. I also write a blog for Stakeholder Centered Coaching on the website called The Coach's Corner. And you can certainly go there. And also sometimes I'll include those in that monthly e-letter that I send out. That's, probably the easiest way to stay connected. I'm on LinkedIn. You can connect with me there too, of course. So those would be the things that come to mind.
Thank you, Jathan. We will put your LinkedIn address at the bottom of the show notes so people can get in touch with you. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is my guest, Jathan Janove. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can email him, jathan@stakeholdercenteredcoaching.com. And this show was produced by Stakeholder Centered Coaching, where we believe everyone deserves a stakeholder-centered leader. Join us next week for another episode of Conversations with Coaches.